Madam President, are you there? As she's working out a couple of, there you go, okay. We just went live, Madam President.
Okay, would you continue, please? I actually am
Yes,
on the line with IT.
Yes, ma'am. Okay, so we are here today, of course, ladies and gentlemen, for our work session that we're doing here. And I just want to say that we're joined by, I believe, all of the members of council are present with us. So at this time, I just want to turn it over. Gary, are you running the presentation?
I can start it. I'm going to kick it off. The initial part is RURA, so that's going to be handled by Rick and Tom Worth. So I'll turn the first portion over to them, and then I'll take it from there. So Rick, it's all yours.
Sure. Thanks, everyone. Again, Rick Rinsky with NBD. Tom Worth and I are going to present sort of an overview of the Rochester Urban Renewal Agency. We know that some of you have had some questions, maybe prompted by some of the recent reporting that was approved, or some of the training and evaluation materials that you've received and have completed. First couple of items on the agenda that thank you, BJ, that BJ just put on the screen for us. Tom Worth is actually going to go through the first couple of those, and then we'll return back to me for the remaining items.
Thank you, Rick. Tom Worth here from the Law Department. And I'm first going to start off with just an introduction on the summary, history and purpose of the Urban Renewal Agency. It was by home rule legislation at the request of the city, established in 1964 by a special act of the state legislature. It's what's called a public benefit corporation, created under the Urban Renewal Agency, a blanket act that covers this Urban Renewal Agency and the other municipal urban renewal agencies throughout New York State. And it is chief mission under the state legislation is to promote the expeditious completion of municipal urban renewal programs. And that part of it is, in its actions, it's established as a public purpose, its implementation of urban renewal plans. And the magic words there, or helpful or keywords there, are public purpose, because it's in some instances when it's necessary to acquire property by eminent domain, you have to establish public purpose. And in instances where the Urban Renewal Agency or the city has established an urban renewal plan to improve a blighted or underdeveloped area, they then have, by operation of law, the public purpose element that is necessary to implement eminent domain and acquire properties for that purpose. Some of the examples of what the RURA can do, or Urban Renewal Agency can do under their laws, is plan and undertake urban renewal projects. And they've done that in establishing urban renewal plans for some of the urban renewal areas that we have around the city. And Rick will be discussing that later on. They can develop, test, and report methods and techniques, carry out demonstrations and other activities to reduce or prevent deterioration or blight. They can provide for demolition and clearance of blighted properties, as I discussed, once they've developed a plan for doing so, and for improving and redeveloping those properties. They can acquire real estate by negotiated purchase, eminent domain, or donation. They can sell, lease, or otherwise dispose of real property. and they can apply for advances, loans, grants, subsidies, contributions from the feds or from state, county, or other public bodies. In terms of the staffing or the governance of the Urban Renewal Agency, the act that established it names you all, members of council, as the members of the board. And by our bylaws, a secretary is Gary Kirkmeyer, as the Commissioner of Neighborhood and Business Development, is secretary to the board. So that's the basic outline of how we began and the main purposes of the urban renewal agencies. And if you have any questions for me, I'd be glad to answer them, or if you want to hold off until after Rick is finished, we could do that too.
Loretta, do you mind if I ask just a quick question now? You want me to wait till the end? Or Willie?
I think you should go for it, Mitch.
I'm just wondering, maybe it's a kind of quick two-party question. One, I mean, urban renewal as terminology is a little bit passé at this point. Have other parts of the state kind of changed the name of their agency? Have any of them actually removed the agency? And I guess that's the second part of my question. Is it feels like what you just described, the uses of RURA are in some ways comparable to the uses of REDCO. And I'm wondering if there has been any talk about kind of merging those things and just updating RURA from 1964.
I do not know whether there has been consideration by the city of updating the title of the name. I know from just casual legal research and looking at the lists of urban renewal agencies or what that are established or authorized by the general municipal law, I think they mostly still all have urban renewal in their name.
Okay.
I have to confess, with regard to REDCO, I'm not familiar enough to really
maybe that's a question
evaluate
for Rick
about how
as the presentation
their mission or their what they're authorized to do under state law would mesh or overlap with what the urban renewal agency does.
That's fine. We don't. I'm sure Gary and Rick will touch on that as we go. I guess my biggest. I think you answered my biggest question, which is what all of the major cities in New York State continue to have urban renewal agencies. That's correct.
I most of them do. I'm not certain that all of them do.
Okay, thank you.
And yeah, I'm very familiar, and maybe Dana Miller introduced me to the concept that it's been called through the years urban removal, that there have been abuses in past decades. But I also know we have you as board of this agency and are informed and aware of that too, and that there are ways to do the process that doesn't earn that moniker of urban removal.
Yeah, the historian in me would just say that urban renewal as a term has negative connotations across the board, and I think it will always continue to have and the connotations are very rooted in 1964 when it was established. So it would make sense at some point to think about modernizing it, but that's I'm not trying to hog the mic for this conversation. I'll let it go at that point.
I have a question as well.
Go ahead, Mary.
Is there a list of properties owned by RURA currently?
That is one thing that Rick will be sharing with you.
Oh, okay. Okay, so that up there is the agenda for what's yet to come. Got it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Are there additional questions now?
Just a comment. The information you're looking for, Mary, is in the handout that BJ sent out.
Thanks.
Okay, we can continue.
Okay, thanks, Tom. BJ, we can go to the next page. Thank you. So this is the Rochester Urban Renewal Agency mission statement as approved back in 2010. The language in it really is reminiscent, if not verbatim, from urban renewal law when the act was initiated back in '64. But I'll read it out loud for those who may not have access to video at this point. The mission of the Rochester Urban Renewal Agency is to stimulate urban economic growth and revitalize urban neighborhoods. This is accomplished through the redevelopment of slum and blighted areas, creating and retaining jobs, attracting new investment, and improving housing opportunities for city residents. So I guess, you know, what we can take from this is that's what the activities or any initiatives related to the RURA are going towards. I think that's really all we get out of that, that piece. BJ, we can go into the next page unless there were any questions on the mission statement. And this question was just recently asked: what properties does the agency own? This is a list of those properties in front of you. Again, I can read these aloud for those who may not have access to video. 36 through 70 South Avenue, that's actually a parking garage. 151 Mount Hope Avenue, that's a vacant parcel on the east side of the Genesee River, just on the southern, just south of the inner loop. 780 Exchange Street, it's a very small parcel, pending sale actually, is part of the South River Corridor Trail Project in the Southwest. 2 Reynolds Street, that's actually just a grass lawn area that's on the corner of West Main Street, adjacent to the Anthony Square housing. And there's 40 Broadway, 46 through 48 Broadway, 50 Broadway, 52 Broadway, 54 through 60 Broadway, 66 Broadway, and 70 Broadway. Those are all contiguous parcels that are actually pending sale for a development on the east end of downtown. And if there are no questions on that, BJ, we can go to the next page. So what we're looking at now are the urban renewal districts in the city of Rochester. There are 11 of them. Hopefully folks can make out on the visual there where they are. I probably won't have to go through all of them to tell you what they are, but I can say that these urban renewal districts have, over time, have had specific purposes, specific initiatives and projects associated with them. And it's literally over decades that some of these urban renewal districts have existed. There have been some in the past that have actually expired. But we just wanted to sort of present to you that these districts are out there now. Are there any questions on that?
I guess I just noticed that there doesn't really seem to be one in kind of the Lyle Otis area. Is that one that expired?
It may have been.
I'll look for that while we go on.
Okay, thanks, Tom.
Just a comment. Tom, could you talk about the difference between the urban renewal district and the property that we own? We can designate an urban, I believe we can designate an urban renewal district, and we have, and yet not necessarily on property.
That is right. The urban renewal agency or the city, the general municipal law of the state gives both the authority to do that, can designate and develop renewal plans for urban renewal districts. And but the urban renewal agency being involved, as far as I know, they're not required to own land in the district. And if for example, there were private entities or that the redevelopment that's in the plan could be accomplished by means other than the Urban Renewal Agency acquiring land, they could do it that way as well. I don't know if that answered the question entirely, but
Yes, a follow-up question. What's the benefit to having a renewal district?
that there has been first in the protocol, or kind of the standard way that it was thought out, at least when it was begun in the 60s and 70s, is that you'd identify an area that is blighted or undeveloped, that you would consult with the community and other neighbors, stakeholders, to identify and develop a plan for that area. And then having both those things, that you've designated an area and then developed a plan. One thing that allows is, in those instances when you do need the city or the Urban Renewal Agency to acquire land, you have your public purpose established already, which is a substantial part of the eminent domain process. Plus just the the kind of public policy benefit of having community involvement in developing the plan, and it not just being a top-down kind of process.
So some of these things can be done outside of an urban renewal district. Like obviously we can get community input, but it sounds like the key difference is being able to establish maybe the public good in advance of, eminent domain. Is that kind of the main goal there? Like that makes it different?
Yeah, there's one, and I also totally overlooked another part of it, and that is that as part of that plan, most of the urban renewal districts have adjusted their zoning requirements. And so you can look in section 120-120 of the zoning code, and you'll see that for most of these districts, as part of their plan, they've developed explicit and individualized zoning requirements for those areas. So there are two parts. That one, you implement your plan through the zoning code, as well as make it easier to acquire land and establish the basis for it when necessary.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Okay.
So, Tom, I don't know if I was fighting with my connection stuff here a few minutes ago. I'm sorry if I was distracting, but Tom, I don't know if you covered under history and purpose, kind of the dark side of this. And I think that was what Councilmember Gruber was speaking to as well. Did you go over that? I mean, there is an underbelly to this thing.
Yeah, and I would just say, before you answer that, Tom, when you shared the mission statement, it used the word slum, and I think that in and of itself is like, it's very much representative of 1960s. Yeah, there's just things. I think there is an underbelly, and I defer to Loretta's question. Just the word slum really sticks out to me.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, or elaborate on that, is yeah, I don't know how much you heard, but I acknowledge that for a long time there's been a nickname, urban renewal, being urban removal, and yet we operate under a state jurisdiction that's never gotten around to maybe modernizing that term, to the extent that like outdated terms or other things in the mission statement that were adopted by the Urban Renewal Agency back 12 years ago are out of date or inappropriate. You have it within your power as members of the board to revise and take another look at that mission statement. But yeah, in terms of there being words like slum in the state statute, yeah, that would be something that requires state legislative action to straighten out.
So to get to it a bit more directly, there was a move, an aggressive move to disenfranchise communities of color. I mean, I think it affected communities of color more than any others. Those areas that were being called slums actually were a reflection on not just living conditions, but a people, about the living environment of populations of people. So there's that kind of thing that this grew upon. And there are areas, even, of course, even in our city, where neighborhoods where we had urban removal that did that.
Yes, and I know that we have to address that, and I think what the laws that we have and authority you have allows, it does not predestine the Urban Renewal Agency, you all, to continue the mistakes of the past.
Okay. All right, you can continue with your presentation.
Okay, BJ, if we go to the next page. So what I'm going to talk about for a couple minutes here is the annual reporting that is required of the Rochester Urban Renewal Agency. About 10 years ago, the New York State Authority's Budget Office notified the RURA that that as a public authority, it is under its regulating jurisdiction, and as such required to do the annual reporting. So we've been completing that reporting since then. I'll just go over sort of a summary of the topics that are in those reports. These are the reports that you will see typically. Well, I'll get to the timing of that in a minute too. But so the topics that the summary of those are governance information. What kind of a public authority is it? For example, it's not an IDA. It's a public authority or urban renewal agency. There's information in the report about the board members and staff. In this case, there really isn't staff per se of the RURA, not paid staff anyway. There's budget and financial information in those reports. There's a section for performance measures that reflect activities and projects. Typically, those are activities within the urban renewal districts. Not exclusively. Sometimes we don't have an actual district. We may have just what's called an urban renewal area, which is sort of the prerequisite to a district. Bull's Head is actually one of those examples on its way to becoming a district, but only an area, considered an area at this point. Procurement, so any procurements, acquisitions, or dispositions by the RURA. Generally speaking, I think, since I've been involved, there really haven't been procurements. I don't recall, actually, since I've been involved as well, any acquisitions. There certainly were decades ago, but there have been dispositions. There have been sales of property from the agency, and those have been reported as they go along. And another piece of this, of course, is generated from our own comprehensive annual financial report. That's part of this annual reporting requirement. The next section down here is really just an FYI on how this information gets reported. They have an online system. New York State Authorities Budget Office has an online reporting system called the Public Authorities Reporting Information System, otherwise known as the acronym PARIS. And again, we've been uploading to that for about 10 years now to complete the requirements of the reporting. The last bullet down here is it's a two-step process. That's why you'll see around January the annual report really for the prior fiscal year And that really can't be submitted to you for approval until the comprehensive annual financial report is completed, because that's embedded within it. So you'll typically see that in January. And then after that, we have a budget report, and which is set up for the next fiscal year. And as required by the authority's budget office, that needs to be reported at least 60 days prior to that fiscal year. So you'll see that coming about March or April. This year was in April. Some years it's in March. Typically, I think it's in March, but we just went with April this year. I think we went in April this year because we thought we were going to have this work session prior to it, but we weren't able to do that. So, yeah, we can go to the next page, BJ, unless there's any questions on that.
I have a question. So the properties that we currently have in RURA, they've been there, it sounds like if we're not acquiring them, they've been there for a while. Is that right?
Yes.
Do you know when they were acquired?
We can look those up. I don't have that for today's purposes, but we can certainly get back to you on that.
Yeah, I guess I'm wondering what the, I don't know if plan is the right word, but if we've had these properties for a while and it looks like we're in the process of developing them, but we're not making acquisitions, is there a plan to refresh the inventory, if you will? And then my second question is, who makes the decisions on, properties to acquire? Is there criteria? And I guess, what's the process of selling them? Do businesses have a certain criteria that they have to meet?
Okay. Yeah, we can definitely get back on that.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
So we'll go on to training.
Yeah, and the next two documents are really, I think, mostly for most of you, review at this point. I know that BJ has been very helpful with getting the information on the training out to you all, and I think most of you have already completed that. It's an online training, and this is just the form that's providing the information on that online training form. If there's anyone who hasn't had the opportunity to complete that, they do list the dates of the next available sessions on the bottom. When this was printed out, so I don't seem to have that page, but again, I think most of you have seen this already anyway, and I just wanted to include it in the presentation as review. Same thing with the next page.
Before you leave that, I just wanted to ask, does it say in here someplace how often we have to do this, or is this a one time? I don't recall.
So it's when it's when we have a new member, a new board member for the agency.
So it's a one-time thing. As council members, we only have to do this training once? Is it annual, biannual, one time, what?
I believe the training is once for the members. I believe the evaluation is annual.
That's annual.
Yeah.
Okay. But the training is one time only. Okay, thanks.
And so that's a segue into the evaluation. Again, I think everyone, the board members have seen this already. Again, so it's just really review. There is an evaluation process and form that's completed annually. Again, BJ has been helpful with that. And yeah, I think that's the end of the presentation for RURA.
Okay. Anybody got additional questions on RURA?
In answer to Councilmember Lupien's question about whether there's been or is an urban renewal agency in the Lyle Otis area, I said I'd go back and look to see whether any of the lapsed ones are. and I didn't find any. Now there could be, if there was one that was established and went out and expired before 2003, that wouldn't be on the list I was looking at. Most of these urban renewal agencies were established with a 40-year expiration date. So there are several lapsed ones out there that are on the books, but by their formation are no longer active.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Is there, are there any additional questions or any additional?
Just a request, and yeah, just one request, but you know, when you get a chance, it would be great to get a list of the expired urban renewal districts and their locations. Map if there is such a thing. But again, certainly not anytime in the next 2 months do we what I want that information.
Okay, I'll check on that. Because I'm kind of amateur historian, so I'd like to look for that one.
You know, a quiet day in the summer, you got nothing to do, having a hard time sleeping, something like
that. I'm certain that map and those locations will speak to that underbelly that I was talking about.
Exactly. Well, you know, I'm sure a big chunks of them are in the Northeast, so that's why I want to see what the list is.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Okay. Well, thank you all. Commissioner, you have anything to add?
Not for that subject, but we have some other subjects I thought you might want to hear about. Just some quick updates. BJ, if you can bring up that agenda, if you have it. I just threw some subjects. You know, we had a last minute cancellation of pretty much half of the dedicated time here. So I threw some subjects that, you know, we've been talking about recently and we're going to continue to talk about. But just to give you some quick updates, and then really, you know, whatever else you want to talk about, or if you want to talk about any of these at length, we can do that. So we've continued to have meetings on this business restaurant grant. We met, actually, it was today or yesterday, I can't remember, they're all merging now. But, you know, we're thinking possibly up to $5,000. We're thinking it's going to be, you know, to give food to residents in some form, either by delivery or some organized on-site drive-up method like we're seeing in other parts of the country. We certainly haven't perfected the plan yet. We're going to reach out to HUD to confirm some of our assumptions based on previous conversations. And we have scheduled time to start to engage restaurants, which we're engaging anyway for other reasons, because we know some of their pain points relative to their, you know, limited footprint that needs to be dealt with. And we have a whole group that's meeting on that. So we got some more engagement to do here. We hope to do that over the next week, get confirmation from HUD. We certainly have goals to make this both geographical and culturally equitable. And, you know, we want to pretty much try to help as many as we can, but we want to get some feedback from the restaurants and how they see it fitting into their models.
Gary, can I just ask a question about that?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm actually I'm not concerned, or I know you're going to be able to find the restaurants who want to do this, right? It's a great opportunity for the restaurants. I actually think the biggest challenge of it is finding the individuals to serve, because the truth is $300,000. I can tell you, you know, because right now FoodLink, we're basically feeding the whole community who needs it, and our burn rate is, you know, that $300,000 wouldn't last 2 weeks for the amount of people that are calling and asking for food to 211 and directly to FoodLink. So I think the issue that we all need to recognize is that $300,000 is not going to serve every person who needs it in Rochester once, let alone twice. So
Right.
How will the city go about determining which small subset of individuals will be able to benefit from this?
So, yeah, we haven't nailed down exactly how we can, because the actual person that's getting served, that's a more difficult parameter to set, because, like, for example, if you have a drive up, you know, we've all seen them on TV, and you don't know who's showing up for that. I think that at some point that our focus is on this. we want to provide some meals to residents, but we want to also jumpstart or continue to help jumpstart businesses, especially restaurants. So we've got this streamlined retention grant that's provided some relief. This will provide some relief. We're working with that other group that's, as you know, because you're part of it, that's looking to broaden their footprint so that they can, house as many employees and sustain that model when they can't under their current footprint. So we're looking at all these things, but I see this as more of a, same as the retention grant, it's a temporary extension of relief that hopefully, when paired with these other things we're trying to do, gets them on the road to recovery.
But so just so that I understand, the $300,000 is going to go into the hands of businesses to be able to produce meals for city residents.
Right.
We all agree with that. Our city residents, is it going to be meant to give free food to particular city residents, or is it to allow restaurants to ramp up so that city residents can go purchase low-cost food? Because right now, the big thing that's happening in like California, for example, is that the California state government is paying restaurants to do what Meals on Wheels is incapable of doing, which is expanding. And I would argue that if we were going to try to get free food into anyone's hands, we're doing such a good job right now we're doing an adequate job right now of feeding school-age children. There's a lot of seniors that if we could find a way to make them the ones that benefit from this program, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, and we actually talked about that exactly today or yesterday, whenever we met last. If we could, we would like to target seniors. And, this whole other effort that we have with Lifespan, where they're doing some delivery, whether it's Staples products, groceries, trying to connect to somebody or trying to have the restaurants connect to some other entity they can partner with to do just that. So again, this is still a work in progress. Seniors is absolutely a target. Low mod residents are a target. But we also want to get restaurants, again, the economy going again, the restaurant activity going again, despite their obstacles with their not being able to employ as many people because of their small geographical footprint and because they can't put people next to each other when they sit down. We want to have this as like a gap measure for those that are interested to start ramping up business.
Okay,
and so
my last question, it's my last statement, I guess. The one thing I have always kind of been curious about with this program is, once again, is it going to be like a Meals on Wheels where we're identifying particular seniors and getting them free food, or are we just getting businesses ramped up to be able to offer curbside service to the city residents? If it's not developed yet, I totally understand. That's a very big difference in program.
It's a huge difference, and the default is the second model because it's the least painful to construct, right? The ideal is the first model, but that's going to require you to partner with other efforts and other agencies, and whether or not they have capacity to play a role.
And I would just say, being on the inside of that, is that there is absolutely a way to make it happen. You're right. It would be more work and more challenging, but I think that we could find a way to make this targeted for specific vulnerable seniors who are having a difficult time accessing food. And if that's the route you want to go down, I'd be happy to facilitate some of those conversations with partners.
Okay.
Councilmember Gruber, do you know that if Meals on Wheels is suffering due to lack of volunteers and that there are seniors that aren't being served that were before the crisis?
Meals on Wheels locally and nationally is just a very, I think it's, I'll try to be polite and call it a clunky program. And and they were unable to ramp up during this whole process, which is disappointing, because what emergency food providers needed to do during this process of COVID was ramp up. And we just haven't seen that happen. People who are not in Meals on Wheels right now, who call Meals on Wheels, get told they're put on a wait list. And so be it, but that's not the response we should be giving people.
Right. So it sounds, what I'm trying to get at is that there's a lot of people not being addressed that, what you're saying is they're new and they're on a wait list. So they're identified, which is great. But I would imagine that people who were getting Meals on Wheels before, due to lack of volunteers, because a lot of volunteers were older, that they may have folks that aren't getting served that were already, clients of Meals on Wheels. So it sounds like there may be some
Maybe. I don't
some of
think
that
Meals
already
on Wheels
identified.
numbers have, I don't think their numbers have gone down at all. I think they've stayed very static and solid.
Okay, well, that's good to hear.
But again, these are conversations that, for better or worse, I have 7 days a week with people. So if at any point, Gary, it'd be helpful to have to loop anyone from NBD into those conversations, I'd be more than happy to do so.
Okay, we'll take advantage of that for sure.
So just
Anything
really,
else?
yeah, I just had a quick question. So if it's up to potentially $5,000, which I'm assuming most restaurants would want $5,000 if that's the max, then we're talking about a total of 60 businesses. If everyone applied for the max, right? Because you said it was $300,000 bucket.
Right.
So that would be max 60 restaurants. And I'm still confused. Is this to help pay for the food that they provide in whichever method they provide it? Or is this to help with expenses like payroll to help people to have their employees on deck?
We would be paying for X amount of meals, and how they absorb that into their business model is how they portray the cost per meal. You know, we'd have to set those expectations in the contract, but it's basically, you know, we want them to be able to increase their business, right, while providing free meals to targeted populations, which, you know, we love to target the seniors.
Okay, all right. Well, let's see how it goes, I guess.
Yeah, and we're not, you know,
when the language is available, let us know.
Yeah, we're not sold on five. You know, we just talked hypothetically about five. Again, we got to engage restaurants to see, you know, how that fits into their mindset, and if they wanted to take this on, how many meals would it equate to? And then we got to talk about the dynamics of delivery and connecting to other people who have lists of people that could be served. So there's some work to do still.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Okay, so the landlord grant, again, we've had some continuing meetings. I have a meeting with the landlord, the leaders of the various landlord associations next week. We need to start engaging them on a bunch of topics that are on this agenda, but we're trying to think of this the same way we did with the restaurant, where we're trying to serve two purposes. This is, again, to serve both tenants and landlords. So landlords who may otherwise not be incentivized to, fix a unit and get it reoccupied and house one of our, folks that are low mod looking for housing, we want to provide that level of incentive. So, there's some funds that are being in the COVID that are being dedicated towards rental assistance and eviction prevention and things of that nature. I don't know that we could ever cover the gap that might hit us here in the near future. So we want to make sure that people in need of housing, especially our 60% and lower AMI residents, are availed units. And so this gives a little, incentive for landlords to participate in that. So we have to engage HUD still. So we're operating under some presumptions or assumptions based on previous conversations, but we need to solidify the opinions that we have of what we can do here. And then once we get with landlords and kind of get a better understanding of how this might work, certainly there would be no payment until we had validation of occupancy. And we would have to have validation of occupancy at a tenant that's at the AMI that we are stipulating. But we'll know a lot more, I think, next week on this one.
Gary, I have a question about that one.
Mhm.
I'm realizing that having a tenant who income qualifies isn't necessarily the same as having affordable rent. Is there any stipulation, not just that the tenant will, be 80 or 50 AMI, but that the rent will be affordable at that level?
Yeah, we'll definitely strive to do that. It doesn't make, like you said, it doesn't make any sense for you to say you have a 60% AMI tenant if they can't effectively live there based on the cost of rent. So
well, they could. That's the thing. Like, people are rent burdened, right? And that happens all the time.
Well, I mean, effectively,
right.
appropriately,
sure, yes.
effectively.
Yes, appropriately.
So yeah, we'll try to incorporate that into our process.
Thank you.
Any other questions about that?
No.
Okay. So quickly on the zoning code rewrite, the RFP has been released. It's out until June 30th. Again, we're RFPing some assistance to write the zoning code, not hiring somebody to do all of the work. So planning staff and zoning staff continue to meet multiple times a week. They're digging into the they're digging into the code section by section. You know, as you know, we have already have a tremendous amount of public feedback through the comprehensive plan effort. But we want to really get ahead of the game here internally, and then have some support externally to facilitate and get us through the process. And that I think we're anticipating coming to council with that RFP in August or September. Any questions about zoning?
Gary,
right,
just
so-
if you, I mean, that's such a big, it's such a big,
Huge.
it's enormous. Are there any concerns about going to RFP knowing, I mean, do you expect when the economy is probably in the dumps the way it will be as you go out for this, do you expect to get more or less applicants? Is there a concern there?
I mean, you know, I don't want to make assumptions, but I would think that there is not as much work out there. So I would think that there would be an attraction to RFPs right now.
Yeah,
but that's just my assumption.
Yeah, that's what I would guess too. I just wanted to hear it from your mouth. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see.
Hey, Commissioner Kirkmeyer, I got a question here. The zoning code for the general citywide, we're looking at doing more multi-unit housing for the city, correct?
Density, yeah. I mean, the comprehensive plan speaks to density, the placemaking plan, you know, that that's again a result of a lot of public feedback. So we're striving to stay in line with that, yes.
Okay, but before you did state that our city can house 300,000 people, but we have about 200,000 at this point. Can you speak on that a little bit, please?
Yeah, so I actually had one of the council members sent me a question earlier on that. So we do have some data on that. So yeah, the city originally built for about 330,000. Last checked, I think we were at 208. Hopefully the census is going to show us growing substantially, hopefully. But nonetheless, we have some indicators of getting closer towards right sizing, but I don't know how you define being at right sizing, right? So what do we know? We know we've done X amount of demolition. So we've done almost 1,800 demolitions since 2009. We've lost 29% of vacant structures since 2015, yet we've added over 1,900 residential units citywide. We've eliminated 3,000 parcels citywide. So yeah, that comes from combining 2 parcels to 1. So there's a lot of indicators and that just all happened as a matter of natural progression. There's been no greening strategies. There's no organized citywide review that's concluded with we need to designate this area for green and things like that, which is still something we should consider, I think. But strategically now we're at a point, I think, where we can look at projects and plans and start to really do some strategic planning around getting closer to than where we are now. But there's only 2 ways to deal with that dynamic, 330 to 208. You either grow population or you reduce housing units. Otherwise you're going to have a lot of vacants. So we're trying to grow population, and I think we have been. Again, when you add 1,900 residential units since 2015 and you lose 29% vacants, and we're not talking about a city that doesn't monitor vacants. We aggressively monitor vacants. So our vacant numbers I would hold up against anybody's in the country as being accurate. Nothing's perfect, but I would hold ours up against any structure. So those are really telling tales there. And I hope that we can reach everybody in the census, because I think that that's going to prove to play out that way. It should. We know that the family equivalent has to be more, because we're occupying more units. So did that answer your question?
Not
In a
really,
way.
Gary.
What do you mean, not really? So all right. So in terms of density, yeah. So all right. So the comprehensive plan.
Gary, you're about to start something, brother. I'm just letting you know.
Huh?
You're about to start something, but go ahead.
So, the comprehensive plan is not unlike those that you would see if you look in any city that's dealing with density, right? Every city wants to be more dense. They want to create more opportunity. When you make it more dense, you level the playing field for everybody to live in places that they want to live, regardless of the size of the unit they want or the amount that they can afford for rent. And so, we certainly want to have a more dense opportunity, and we want to have the opportunity for people to do like in-law quarters. We want to have wealth building opportunities for people that want to, broaden their current housing unit. So all those things, I think, speak very loudly to a more dense and a more flexible zoning code.
But at the same time, my comment there. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
So I hear you, but as we're looking at the zoning and the rezoning, and we talk about greening, one of the plans out of past administrations around greening, effectively to me, looked like an abandonment of the Northeast. When we're talking about slum clearance, and we're looking at these things from a racial equity lens, and it's kind of funny. Pittsburgh has a better example of it than Rochester, but Rochester is a good example of it too. You see a neighborhood like the South Wedge, which is pretty high density, incredibly small houses that in many instances are similar in size and scope to areas that were wiped out in the Northeast.
Yeah, and I think it's not it's citywide. We want to have increased density. I think we way over downzoned the city in 2003, way over.
Right.
And
so I'm sorry. Go ahead. I felt.
Well, I
fell out. Right.
That can cause vacancies. I mean, when you have a building, and we experience this in code enforcement almost each and every day, where you have a building that was used for many years for, let's say, a mixed-use structure, business on the first floor, 2 on the second, or even just a straight 2-family that wasn't built as a 2. And now 9 months of vacancy, you can't have that anymore.
Right.
Then now you got a substantial cost to deconvert it. Now the property's devalued. Now it stays vacant, and then we demolish it.
Right. So, I mean, there are just some huge challenges there.
Yep.
I know in Beechwood, some of the same people who fought hard to have our area zoned R1 are now realizing that maybe that wasn't the best idea and are now kind of, on the train of more density, but it's still thought of by many as a dirty word. And I think there's a lot of education to do about the benefits of density to a neighborhood, to be able to support small businesses and a robust transit system, and to break down some of the fear around what did happen in neighborhoods, and kind of the demonization of renters, without the full picture of everything that happened with the blockbusting and the redlining, to really create the situations that some of the neighborhoods are experiencing.
Right.
So I'm
really, but be clear too. Look, it's also, when you're talking about the demonization of renters, historically, it was a demonization of Black and Hispanic renters.
Yes.
It was when Black and Hispanic folks moved in neighborhoods that the value of the neighborhood was perceived to immediately drop. And it is still an issue in this community and across this country today, that if you have a neighborhood that is predominantly Black and Hispanic, even if it is predominantly owners, it is still valued at a lower rate. So, and that is an issue and a problem across the country. So as we're looking at this rezoning, Willie, I'm gonna need you to kick in here, brother. I'm surprised you didn't show up already. We need to have that racial equity lens, and really make sure that we're creating opportunities across the
range for people across multi-income spectrums to own. I don't have anything against renting, but let's be honest. Renting, if you're renting, you're paying more than it costs to own on its face. Because if you weren't paying a premium, it wouldn't be in the interest of the landlord to rent it.
No, and I hear you, Mike. I think, when the Councilmember Pio's, question about multi-units,
Yeah.
I think that's what a lot of people fear is these big houses getting
Right.
chopped up into, units and rented. But I guess what I'm saying is that in itself isn't bad necessarily. I don't think that's not really going to happen in some of these neighborhoods. Just the economics don't necessarily make sense, but that renter doesn't equal bad. But I think sometimes renter is code for Black and brown people, and that's really at the root. If we have to really look underneath of the fear. So I hear you, and I also hear you on the ownership, which is why I think the auxiliary dwelling units that Commissioner Kirkmeyer was talking about with the in-laws are really exciting, because it does create an ownership level that maybe doesn't exist right now, and to diversify what's available to own. And also multiple units. I have several people that are interested in multi-generational housing.
Sharing housing, right?
Where the mother wants, or the mother and father want to buy a house, and they want their kids to live there and their parents to live there. So multi-dwelling also doesn't necessarily have to mean renter.
Right, but that auxiliary dwelling unit exists solidly within the history of this community. You look at King Street, where I grew up, and there were a ton of those properties in multi-generational housing. You look across the Northwest, especially around Saratoga Avenue, ton of those properties. I think one of the things as we're looking at this that I think that we really should be looking at is an issue and a concern around the conversion of multifamily housing into multifamily housing. I think this community was done a disservice in many instances when we took beautiful homes that were castles, for lack of a better way of putting it, and cut and allowed whoever to cut them however they did and turn them into multifamily housing. And just, I wouldn't say degraded the quality of the neighborhood, that's not the issue, but really degraded the house. So I think there are a lot of things that we need to balance and a lot of balls to keep in the air here. But, do we need to push towards density? Absolutely. And I guess my last thing is a unit is not a unit is not a unit. I would argue that if we can find a way to incorporate and strongly support passive housing, redevelopment, remodels, and also new builds, that gives a quality of life that will greatly increase the value of our city. And so if we have an opportunity, passive housing.
Passive.
Okay. Yes.
Gotcha.
So, and I got a guy who can come and do a wonderful workshop on that. We can't go visit his house anymore, but but definitely worth seeing. So all of that to say, a lot of opportunities, but there are, there's going to definitely be some wariness, because I'm not going to lie to you, Gary. You say green, and I start going, oh, here we go with that stuff again, where the Northeast turns into a game preserve and there's deer running around, don't nobody live nowhere. I just get like, so I just go left automatically when people start saying green, because it's like, here we go again.
So so that's part of community development, right? Is we're doing that now. We're looking to create additional owner occupant opportunities for new construction. We have housing development opportunities that we're looking at, and they're predominantly in the Northeast that are on the horizon that we're talking about. So, when I say greening, I'm not talking about any particular area. I'm talking about trying to. Maybe a golf park.
What are those trigger words?
And then, quickly on the density thing, when I'm talking density, I'm not talking high-end multiple dwelling. I'm talking about two families, singles to twos, convenient, unimpactful, but very impactful to people's lives density. You know, I can tell you I know there's going to be people that stand up against density, but I will tell you that we have some really hard factual statistics that point to the detriment that comes from an over-aggressive, reduction of zoning district. I mean, we have the data. We know when you had two families that were non-conforming, we know that they, on average, they stayed vacant twice as long. They were demolished by like 6 times the rate of a normal two-family vacant. And so it really led to a lot of deconstruction and the areas that it allowed it in.
Right. And I guess my last question is, as we're looking at this, I would just ask that we try to find a way to activate our sidewalks. We just need more people walking. We just need we need more, and we need that mixed. We really do need mixed incomes where there is an opportunity for retail, and I get it. It's hard to do retail in a residential neighborhood or near a residential neighborhood as retail is currently considered. But at some point in time, we're all going to walk to the store again if there's a store to walk to. And the more that we have, I think the better we are as a community.
I mean, to some extent, we've had some developments where maybe we operated under the assumption that if you build it, retail will come. And I think that we need to more and more merge that into the development itself. We have to look more holistically at where we have large housing efforts. We need to, best we can, incorporate that retail mix because that's how you raise a whole neighborhood. You have to have services. You have to have things for people to walk to, people to frequent, and then the businesses themselves can thrive because they're getting frequented. All right, so anything else on zoning? All right. So City Rise, real quick. So land management, we're still moving forward with land management. Again, for those not familiar with that, it's the overhaul of our building information system. It's going to change the way that we conduct business, the way we communicate to people, the way that people can touch us. That we're doing vendor scripted demos in June. I think we hope to get the solidified contract to council in October with the beginning of January of kicking off the project. It's probably a 2-year project, 1.5, 2-year project, just to do buildings and zoning. So it's a really large endeavor, but we hope to kick that off in January. The property
Gary, before you go, you said City Rise is what?
So City Rise is one of the Attorney General grants that helps us deal with vacant and abandoned properties. Initially, that's the intent was. So we have the land bank funding, then we have the zombie grant and City Rise grant. So City Rise started off. So land banking was to do, activity. So demo, construction, whatever. Zombie was how do you better manage your inventory and how can you ramp up activity like abandonment actions. City Rise was how can we enhance your technology capabilities, because a lot of cities, even though we already had a vacant map online before City Rise, before building blocks, pretty much nobody else in this state did. So they really were trying to serve the needs of the greater good or more people. So they wanted to give everybody an opportunity to get building blocks. So 18 cities got an opportunity to get access to building blocks. For us, it was just connecting building blocks to our current data that we were pushing out. To others, it was a new endeavor. They didn't have any capabilities to show the public, data. So second phase of City Rise was engaging our hard to reach population. So our tenants, and then the third phase was you crafted a plan in phase 2 to deal with serving the hard to reach population better. Part of that plan incorporates some cost offset to land management. Because again, we believe that land management will ultimately raise the level of service to everybody. Just think in terms of right now we have some data out there, and if you're just an average savvy tenant that wants to find a place, you can see if there's code violations. We're about to add the C of O data in there. And so you can see, whatever history you want with that, right? But the advanced stage here where we're going to is you can see what the property manager score is. You can see what the owner's score is. You can see the history of the property. And now you can make a really intelligent decision. Is that where you want to go? And so, just by process of elimination over time, that has an institutional accountability that's unparalleled. You can't ticket and get that kind of accountability. That's real, because what that means is dollars. That means that people won't rent from you if you're not a good behavior, right? And so, over time, this is going to really enhance our thing. So the two things that are on here, the property manager licensing, that's going to contribute to the data side by allowing us to certify people that, and we're using the term property manager the same way we use building owner registry. So it's the point person that's responsible for property maintenance. It's not the person that rents the unit, maybe not, but who is that person that we call when the tenant calls us? That's the person. And so that person could be the owner of the property, or it could be an agent of the owner. And so, we have draft legislation right now that law's reviewing. Again, I got a meeting with landlords next week. We're setting up meetings with tenants. We've kind of already engaged tenants in the process of what some of the things they'd like to see. And believe it or not, a lot of landlords and property managers want this because they want the level playing field. And so if you think about it in terms of if the person that's a bad actor in the terms of property manager, they're not going to be in business long, because nobody's going to want to attach their property to somebody that has a score that reflects a poor performance, right? So, but just over probably a 2-year period, that will have self-built-in public-facing accountability that will drive change, and at the same time avail an opportunity for others to get in the game, because it doesn't require you to be a licensed broker. It doesn't, you just have to be able to be responsible for the property and the upkeep of it.
Is this the same, are these the same provisions that we worked on about 4 or 5 years ago? Maybe not that long, but where it required the person, they have to be available or reachable within a certain time. They can't be more than 2 hours away or an hour.
45 minutes. Yep. So that's the building owner registry legislation, right? So we adopted that as a beginning stage to say, that's just establishing a point of contact. There's no accountability in it. It's just we have the name on record. They have to provide a business phone number that's publicized, so that whether it's a neighbor or the tenant, if you don't otherwise have that contact, you have it. We have it. We present it in building blocks. So if this is going to take it to another level to say, okay, if that's going to be your property manager under our terminology, under our definition, that person has to be certified and annually renew their license, just like the licensing element of other areas of a city. And therein lies, you don't have an inherent right to get that every year. You earn your right through your application, and there'll be due process available to people to be able to say, if our opinion is you shouldn't be renewed, we'll have process in place to say, if we deny that, you'll have a right to due process. But it just has all these, but I think bigger than that and more important than that is the public facing accountability that comes from people interested in what this person's score is.
Is there a fee for that?
There'll be a fee. Yeah, there'll be a fee. So City Rise, the dollars here gave us a starting point, $125,000 towards the 1.5 person staff that have to do this work. And then the revenue will be just basically equivalent to what we need to sustain that level of support through the collection of fees.
So somebody will actually do that calculation though. I mean, if challenged, we say, well, you're charging.
We already have it.
Okay, all right.
So that's the beauty of data, is like we can go into our data and we can tell you how many unique building owner registry persons there are. We can tell you how many have 1, how many have 10, how many have 50. And we can correlate that rather quickly to say, we know we have about 6,000 unique single property responsible building owner registries. We have a lot less that own 5, a lot less than on 10, and it just goes on and on. So
Yeah.
based on that, you just do the math and calculate what's an appropriate fee based on that data. It's not going to be an enormous fee.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
And then if nothing else on that, the lastly is the emergency hazard repair policy that we have a draft policy. We're in the process of finalizing that. Again, this is stuff we have to engage landlords and tenants about. We had some initial engagement with tenants in City Rise Phase 2. Some of the things that we talked about. What are things we have to have a reasonable plan that doesn't over promise what we're able to do, because there's no additional staff here to facilitate this emergency abatement. This is just our contract services unit who has relationships with contractors in the various aspects of work that we would do per the policy. And, we would be dispatching them when, the criteria is met to, verify that we should be in that. So, if you think about a furnace, we have our emergency assistance grant, right? So we have contractors on contract for that. But it's going to require participation from the tenant. And really the policy is going to be focused on sustaining and preventing displacement, right? So this is, when I said about City Rise 2 is about equitable enforcement too, right? So it's about our most difficult to reach residents and equitable enforcement so that they're not innocently displaced because of the inactions of a responsible party. So water heaters, furnaces, maybe major electrical, things that are requiring them to choose to leave because they're not safe to stay. And it's obviously only in the absence of the landlord taking care of business.
Hey, Gary. So
Yeah.
on this one, I know you have to speak with landlords and tenants. Originally, the thought was for buildings with with more units. I would love for you to be open-minded as you go through this process, and more so on the most egregious situations as opposed to number of units. So if there were a single or a double or a triple that literally no water, no heat, so on and so forth. I mean, I know that opens us up to a lot more, but I would think if the goal is just displacement and not having that we would want to ensure that even singles, doubles, and triples didn't go through that. Again, my vote would go towards the most egregious cases as opposed to necessarily, building size.
So when you think about it from an application perspective of, let's agree that we had 4 different things that we would address, right, from a safety perspective, and I just named some of them, but let's just say there was 4. Anyone that meets any of that is egregious. There isn't going to be a level. This is not like squalor conditions. We're not using this to go mitigate squalor. This is like, you could live there safely if your furnace works and your landlord's not fixing it. So yeah, we would love to serve everybody in that scenario, but we got to walk before we can run. And this is a new venture. We are not adding any personnel to do this. We don't have any expanded capacity to do it. And this is a very, very stressed area of city government. Code enforcement is one of the most stressed areas of city government. So we got to walk before we can run. But I will agree that we will step back on a regular basis to assess, is too much going out? Do we have the capacity to do this? Is it going to, because I would just as soon spend it over a year, at the most 2-year period, because it's going to replenish itself as people pay the bills that come to them from this activity. But sometimes you don't get that money back until taxes are paid. And sometimes you don't get taxes paid until the property is foreclosed on. So sometimes there can be a lag of a year or so before you realize that fund getting replenished. But we're going to be looking at all of that. So we have to start with reasonable expectations, because if we overpromise, we will flat out underdeliver. We can't, you guys get some calls, you don't know the volume of calls we deal with no heat. You just don't know. So, and that's not that everyone would result that way. I think over time, Jackie, what's going to happen is, as we go out and people get a bill, and that bill's equating to more than they probably would have spent otherwise, that's a learned lesson. Probably won't have to do that again for that, right? So over time, I think we can eventually gravitate to broadening it without the inconvenience of starting and falling down before we can stand up.
All right. I hear you. And I would like us to be open-minded as we move forward. And I recall you saying that if we needed more money, we would absolutely find a way to make it happen. So I'm with you though, I'm with you. So let's see how it plays out. But I know that this is a huge need. And at the end of the day, it's gonna be about where our values and our principles are in terms of who we're assisting. But I'm with you.
Yeah.
But in that, so my last thing really quick, because there's a whole host of other things I sent you, but in that light there, in terms of really setting the tone for some of these property owners, I know that we started a case with the Hungerford situation, but I really would like to encourage us to really think about making an example of an egregious case where we really did, at the end of the day, put up criminal charges or whatever it takes to really set the tone for some of these worst of the worst property owners to say, we mean business, and you don't get 1 year, you don't get 2 years, 5 years to sit on things and do a little bit at a time to show us that you're quote unquote making progress. So I would encourage us to continue down that road of finding a case that makes sense and set that example.
Yeah, and I think that, again, what we can do as we start to construct these other programs and as we start to strengthen and even increase our data, we can create all kinds of mechanisms to help people make, decisions. We can help regulate from, like people like U of R who let owners advertise units, housing council. We can tie into those. We already tie into those. They're not supposed to be letting them advertise if they don't have a C of O. But we can start populating people's scores, and anybody where we have to go and actually do the work, we can have a running tally of where we've had to do that too. I mean, there's lots of ways that we can promote.
I like that idea too.
Yeah, we can definitely populate. These are that's factual information, right? It's not. It is what it is. And so the public has a right to know that.
Councilmember Lupien. You're on mute.
So my question is there a connection between the fire department, I guess, and the police department, but I think probably the fire department, say, someone's unit is deemed unlivable and they have to immediately leave the premises due to safety. Is there going to be a trigger to NBD to, to be able to see if this is a situation where this fund is going to need to be used and to be in dialogue with the landlord? Or is that incumbent on the tenant?
Well, so let me just explain how that typically happens. Well, how it happens 100% of the time. So anytime after our first responders respond to something, and it's always fire. So we get 1,100 referrals from fire every year. So fire goes out, right? Because we don't work after hours. They do. They go out and respond to that situation. If it needs a red tag, something gets red tagged, whatever the issue is, they mitigate. They're not removing people. They're not removing people. Now, people by choice may leave because they're cold, but they're not sending people on their way unless there's a fire, right? So if there's a fire,
or an
then
electrical,
they work with agencies.
An electrical
They'll have it shut down. They'll have the power shut down, right? So then it comes to us. Every day we have staff that go into red alert and pull out jobs for us. And so code enforcement follows up on everything that fire sees the night before. And so that would automatically come to us. We would already have a case. We would go out, and that would begin the process of saying, site, you need to do it. And then that would follow, the same progression that we're talking about. So it would be in the kitty with the other ones, probably more urgent because it would be a situation where the electric's off or, the furnace is off.
Right, I would think if this is to prevent displacement, in that case, the person would already be displaced and it would be working to keep the person, to allow the person to come back.
Yeah, but keep in mind, you have to remember, we have to avail due process to people. So even if it's an urgent issue, right? So it's a one-day violation, immediate violation. That still doesn't go out to the next day. The notice and order that's issued in the system today, prints tomorrow, goes out in the mail. We would also engage them verbally, right? We would call, they're going to get a call, as they probably did from the fire department. So we have to avail opportunity to people to mitigate the problem. We can't just jump to conclusion and solve it for them. But if that doesn't get a good response, that could pick up pretty quick, at a quick pace thereafter, so long as the contractor we send out has access to where they need to have access to. So the two things we're going to have from tenants in terms of cooperation is we need to have free access to the area in question. Sometimes tenants don't have access to the basement, right? We need to have the tenant agree that if we resolve this issue, their intention is to stay. And based on those two things, we will move forward.
Okay. Thank you.
Mhm.
All right. Are there any additional questions? We're sort of over our time, but if you have additional questions. If there are none, I'd like to thank Commissioner Kirkmeyer and his staff for this very informational presentations today. We appreciate you being here. And to everyone else, if there's no additional business, we may consider ourselves adjourned. All right, Councilmember Gruber.